So Jesus is going to tell a parable so he can show just how absolutely evil greed is. And it is. In the second reading, I was listening to Colossians, the second reading says, and that greed, which is idolatry. And so greed is idolatry. And so what is our life about? Our series is called Practical Discipleship. How to live in this world. How to be a disciple of Jesus in this world where greed reigns, where it really is all about greed, where it really is all about consuming things. And so as we open our hearts, we're confronted with, again, that phrase from Jim Carrey. He said, I honestly think you should get all the money you desire, you should have all the success you desire, you should have everything you've ever dreamed of, so that you can know that that is not the answer. Greed is not the answer. Our true home is heaven. And the second reading said, if you've been raised with Christ, then set your mind on things above, not on the things below. Not on the things of greed, not on the things of this world, but set your mind always on the things above. Live for that, and for that alone. There's a fun story about a man who took a vacation into Europe, and he went and visited a particular rabbi that was famous, that was well known. And when he went into the rabbi's place, he noticed there was just a chair and some books on a shelf. And he said to the rabbi, why don't you have more furniture in here? And the rabbi looked at him and said, why don't you have more furniture in here? And the man said, well, I'm just passing through. And the rabbi said, I'm just passing through. Yeah, this is not our home, folks. We really, really are just passing through. And if you get caught up in this world, and everyone does, you're in good company. If you get caught up in this world, you don't get caught up into happiness. You don't get caught up in the answer. You don't get caught up in life itself. You get lost. When you get caught up in this world, you get lost in this world. And we've seen friends, family, people who are just lost in all that. So there's a story about a fox. He was trying to figure out how to catch the birds. They were too fast, and so he offered some of the birds. He would catch worms, and he would offer the birds, if you give me a feather, I'll give you a worm. And one of the birds thought, that's a great idea. I can spare one feather. And so he gives him a feather, and he gets a worm, and he starts to think, this is pretty cool. All I have to do is give him one feather, and he gives me one worm. And after several days of this, the bird didn't have enough feathers to fly away. And the moral, of course, of the story is, what a horrible way to go. Giving your life away one feather at a time. Giving your life away, what? Just one little bit at a time. Little by little, giving our lives away. And so, everyone knows this. Tom Brady, for goodness sakes. Anyone know who Tom Brady is? This story, he was interviewed when he only had 3 Super Bowl rings. What's he have now? 6? He can't hardly count. More than a handful. And so he had 3 Super Bowl rings, and he's doing an interview on TV, and you can watch it. And on the interview, he just comes out and says, I know I have 3 Super Bowl rings. I know I have more money than anyone else I know. I know I date the most beautiful women in the whole world. He says, but all I can think is there's got to be something greater for me. And then they interviewed, they said, what are you talking about? You have everything. You're living the dream. He said, oh God, there's got to be more than this. Tom Brady, who has everything, realizes what Jim Carrey said. Yeah, I wish you could have everything so you could realize too, it's not the answer. The man's building the bigger barns. It's not the answer. And so, what is the answer? Well, Jesus in the parable has God say to the man, "This day your life will be required of you. You fool, this day your life will be required." What's the answer? It might sound morbid, but I'm going to teach you something that I don't know if you've been taught before, but it's a great spiritual truth. It really is. It's one of the top 5 spiritual truths that there are. And in the time of Jesus, in the time of the philosophers like Plato, who lived a little bit before Jesus, and the saints like Athanasius and St. Gregory, who lived just a couple hundred years later, they all teach the same thing. And the teaching is this: life ought to be a meditation on death. This day your life will be required of you. I've been on a lot of deathbeds, and I'll tell you, I don't know anyone who on their deathbed cared any more about a job, about money, about a grudge they were holding against a sister, about any of these things. Everyone was just full of forgiveness, full of ready to leave and depart this world, and they didn't care anything about this world. They realized now that life has meaning, and that's not it. What they should have cared for all along was those things that mattered most: setting your mind on things above, loving one another as I have loved you, as Jesus says. So Plato, and Gregory quotes Plato, and he says that life ought to be a meditation on death. It's not morbid. Wisdom of Sirach, right in our Bible, chapter 7, verse 6, says, "In all you do, remember the end of your life, and you will never sin." Wow, really? Never sin? I'd like to go through the end of through my whole life and never sin. How do you do that? In all you do, in every thought you have, in every word you speak, in every deed you do, remember the end of your life, and then you'll never sin. Yeah, if I'm thinking about the end of my life, I'm not going to do anything to endanger that. Another way it was put, again by St. Gregory, he said, really what we ought to, our whole care, our whole attention should be concentrated on one thing: our departure from this world. And like a wise traveler, we ought to be preparing for that departure. We ought to be ready, planning, packing our bags for that time where we go to our true home, where we leave this place and go to our true home. And then St. Athanasius says simply this. He says, "Recall your exodus." Isn't that interesting? He calls it an exodus. He calls our going home an exodus. Why? Because heaven is the promised land. Did you know that? Our promised land is there. Remember your exodus every hour, and keep remembering your death every day. That is a great spiritual truth. Most people won't want to talk about it. They think it's morbid, but it truly sets us free. It truly guides us in how to live this life. What would I do today if I knew I was going home? How would I live it? How would I treat you? How would I treat anyone else? What would I do with all the things I have? Yeah, that's our faith. We're just passing through. And what a wonderful journey here. Yeah, but even more so, what a wonderful home in heaven, and what a wonderful faith we have.